Hi everyone, it's Kristy-Lee here and welcome to episode number 12 of HR Support for Australian Businesses. Happy Friday. I hope you have had a wonderful week and are looking forward to the weekend, which is upon us. Hope you've got great plans for the weekend and that the weather is wonderful wherever you are at. Now, today on HR Support for Australian Businesses, we're going to be talking the tricky topic of compliance, which I know is one of the most dreaded topics for small businesses because, let's face it, fair work doesn't always seem particularly fair to most of us. So before we dive into that though, and we get into some of the compliance essentials that I want to let you know about and make sure you are not avoiding. If you are joining us today on Facebook in our Facebook group, HR Support for Australian Businesses, firstly, welcome to you. It's great to have you here. I am going live using an app known as StreamYard, and you will just need to give StreamYard permission to show your name if you do wish to make a comment, ask a question, or join in the conversation. And wherever you're joining us from today, whether it's on LinkedIn, in Facebook, or over on our YouTube channel, I would absolutely love for you to join in the conversation. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you would like to add to the discussion, anything at all, just use the chat function and I would really, really love to hear from you. For those of you who I don't know, hi there, my name is Kristy-Lee Billett. I'm the director and founder of a HR consultancy practice known as the Footprint Group. I'm also the CEO of an online HR community for small businesses called People Powered HR. I'm the host of the People Powered Business podcast, and I co-host the Grow Your Influence podcast with leadership expert Juliette Robinson. And in fact, on that topic, we were just recording some episodes this morning for the Grow Your Influence podcast, and we've got some great episodes coming up on that podcast. So if you aren't already subscribed to that podcast, wherever you usually catch your podcasts, go and find the Grow Your Influence podcast. It's got a little picture of both Juliette and I there on the tile. Have a listen, and if you enjoy it, please subscribe and leave us a rating or review so that we know that you're enjoying the podcast. Now, from my HR consultancy perspective, I've been working with businesses for more than 20 years on all aspects of their recruitment and human resources. But for the last 15 years, I've actually been running my own consultancy practice. And for the last 10 years, I've specifically been working exclusively with small to medium-sized businesses on all aspects of their HR. Because the reality is you can't have a business that gives you all the success that you desire and any sense of freedom from the business without creating the right team. And for small businesses, HR is a really, really important topic, but something that they struggle to get support with and advice on because they aren't large enough to need a HR guru on their team, but they do need some support and advice along the way. And that's where people like me come in to support them with that. And one thing that I've noticed working with businesses over this period of time is when it comes to compliance, it can be a frustrating topic. I know many of you have told me that fair work doesn't seem fair, that trying to be compliant is actually a really big burden. A lot of red tape is involved, and you feel like the legislation has been created for big business and for employees and not for people like you. And I get it. And to be fair, it's actually true. Fair work is more swayed towards supporting employees. Almost all industrial relations legislation is. But sticking your head in the sand when it comes to your compliance is absolutely not the answer. And I know that's the approach many people take because you've got so many plates spinning, you're doing all the other things in business that becoming an expert on legislation and compliance feels just all too hard. And if you don't think about it, you don't look at it, then maybe it just won't exist. But the problem is sticking your head in the sand doesn't avoid the reality. And when it comes to compliance, the risks are real. There are fines and penalties which can be issued for seemingly minor things. We're talking thousands of dollars for each individual who's responsible in the business, many thousands of dollars for corporations, not to mention the risks that come with continued ongoing non-compliance, back payment claims, unfair dismissal claims, and a whole range of other things. So the risks are real. And for some of these breaches, they can't only come out, they will come after your business, but they won't stop there. The ATO and the like can come after you personally in terms of your personal assets and wealth. So the risks are certainly real. And for that reason, sticking your head in the sand when it comes to compliance is absolutely not the answer. And so today I'm going to share with you 4 compliance essentials that you definitely don't want to avoid if you employ staff in your business and that are really not too difficult to get your head around. And if you focus on these 4, you will be well along the way to making sure that you are protected. So I firstly want to talk about why sticking your head in the sand when it comes to compliance is not the answer. The reality is, even if your head's buried in the sand and you're not looking at it, the tide is going to come in. There is no avoiding the reality that you face if you've got a compliance breach on your hands. And in fact, the longer you stick your head in the sand, the worse you're actually making the situation. If you identify that you've got an issue, if you raise your head out of the sand long enough to tell what's going on and to see the real issues, you can correct course, you can make change, you can minimize the damage. But so often when we think we've got a problem, our first instinct is to run away and hide, stick our head in the sand, and total avoidance. And it's not the solution. You're in fact only making your situation worse. You're only increasing your risks, and you're potentially putting your business and your personal assets at even more risk. So let's talk about what some of those risks are when it comes to compliance. The Fair Work Commission can hand out fines on the spot to businesses for very, very simple things. And I'm going to talk about some of these compliance essentials. But the fines themselves, what are they? How much? Well, from the Fair Work Commission's perspective, the on-the-spot fines can be over $1,000, around $1,300 per individual who's responsible for the breach. So that could be you as the business owner, it might be your finance manager, could be other people. But for a corporation, for your business, the fines are over $6,000 per breach. And if you've got a breach amongst 10 different employees, you do the maths. We are easily in the tens of thousands of dollars zone of potential. That's one type of risk, the penalties and the infringement notices and fines that can come from the Fair Work Commission. What about the underpayment risks? We heard in the media a lot, particularly pre-COVID, about a lot of hospitality businesses that were really getting stung on back payment claims because they hadn't been paying their staff correctly. And it wasn't intentional. Some were computing errors, some were just not keeping an eye on things. They had their head in the sand. And just because you pay your staff an annual wage doesn't mean you don't have to cross-check against the award to make sure you're not going to be exposing yourself to potential back payment claims. So that's another risk. What about unfair dismissal claims? Almost all unfair dismissal claims end with a monetary settlement because the employer wants to get this over and done with, and the employee is going into this chasing cash. I actually did a quick Google search before I jumped on live to see if there was like an average estimate, and the number of websites popping up in my feed with instructions for employees about how to get the most out of an unfair dismissal claim was a little bit mind-boggling and a little bit scary, to be fair. So unfair dismissal claims are costly. The maximum an employee can get for an unfair dismissal claim is 6 months' pay. Now, there is some caps on it, but the caps are $100,000 type caps. So think about 6 months' pay. What does that look like? Can you afford that in an unfair dismissal claim? And even though not many claims get to that point, I have absolutely seen some settle at that point. Almost all claims end at conciliation, and almost all conciliations end with a payment monetary amount being agreed to. It might be a few weeks, but it's usually around 6 weeks. Can you afford that? Do you want to spend that? Absolutely not. And then, of course, we've got the other issue with employees versus contractors and the risks there, and ATO determining that they are in fact an employee, not a contractor, sham contracting. They're going to come for you for back payment of superannuation, back payment of taxes, and they will go after your personal assets from the ATO. If Fair Work can't, ATO can. So there's a lot of risks when you stick your head in the sand when it comes to compliance. So what are the 4 compliance essentials that you can look at right now to help make sure that your business is secure and protected? Really simple ones. There is a lot more you can be doing, but I want to share 4 compliance essentials today. In fact, I'm going to throw in a bonus 5th one whilst we're here. Let's start with the obvious: pay slips and record keeping. There are actually rules about what needs to go on a pay slip, when a pay slip needs to be provided, what information's involved. A breach of those will end you with one of these $6,000 fines if the Fair Work Commission audit your business. So make sure you're across what your payslip and record keeping requirements are, and make sure you're doing them. Now, thankfully, these days, most of us are on software like Xero or MYOB, which will automatically make that a really easy task for us. but it's our responsibility to make sure the detail on there is correct, they're being provided in a timely manner, and we're complying with our record keeping requirements. And if you're not sure what they are, do your research, jump on the Fair Work website and find out. So payslips and record keeping, that's number one in terms of basic compliance essentials. Number two is making sure you're across the national employment standards. Now, the national employment standards are the 11 key criteria that apply to all employees. They are protected provisions, and you cannot wriggle room around them. I would have a conversation with a business at least weekly where they're asking whether it has to be a 38-hour working week. Why can't they make theirs 40 or 42 hours? Because it's part of the national employment standards. There is no wriggle room on this. You cannot mandate a work week that is any more than 38 hours a week. Everything else is overtime. 38 hours is the maximum a permanent employee can work in Australia. There are other aspects of the national employment standards as well. Of course, there's 11 of them. There's rules around casual conversion. All of the leave entitlements are tied up in the national employment standards. Rules around flexible work arrangements are in there as well. So even if your staff are not covered by a modern award, which most employees are, but there certainly are some that are not, you want to be across the national employment standards and ensure that you are compliant with them. The third area of compliance essentials is the modern awards. Now, these are a doozy. Almost all employees who are covered by the Fair Work Act, which is almost all employees in Australia, will be covered by one of more than 120 modern awards. Now, I'm not going to lie, the awards are tricky to navigate. It's one of the questions I get asked most often by members of our people-powered HR community is in how do I navigate around this award? How do I interpret this clause in the award? Have I got the right award? And yes, it's not always that easy to tell. You must ensure that you firstly are paying your employees and using the provisions in the correct modern award. So you need to make sure you've determined the right modern award. And for most businesses, there is more than one award at play. Some staff will be covered by one award, other staff might be covered by other awards. So know which award applies to each individual employee in your business. And if you need help with that, reach out, get some support from our consultancy practice on that, or even better, join us inside People Powered HR where we talk about this all the time. Know what your modern award is. Understand all of the intricacies that are in that award because they are the conditions of employment that you must adhere to. Now, I was helping one of our members with some award inquiries just this week. Some awards are ridiculous. Some awards are very difficult to interpret. Some awards have an allowance for just showing up to work. They're complicated. And the nuances and the details and the cross-referencing of different clauses can be really tricky. Even just determining which classification can be tricky. But it's essential because that's the minimum requirements you have to comply with. So know your award and know how to interpret your award is number 3. Number 4, if you need to terminate someone, know how to do it legally. Unfair dismissal claims, like I discussed earlier, are one of the biggest areas of risk. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't terminate employees if it's no longer working, if there's poor performance, certainly if there's been a breach such as fraud or something along those lines, of course. And exiting people from our business is a normal part of having employees in our business when we need to, of course. But knowing how to do it in a compliant way, in a way that's going to make sure your business is protected from any of those risks is imperative. In fact, this is probably the area that I see most businesses come unstuck with, get themselves into hot water. They come to us for support with an unfair dismissal claim. But if we can avoid that, of course, avoidance is far better than trying to find a solution. So know your rights and obligations when it comes to exiting someone from your business. And to throw in a 5th compliance essential, understand the difference between an employee and a contractor. Look at the ATO's website. They've got a great decision-making tool there. If they are an employee, please pay them, treat them, engage them as an employee. Because if you get caught for that sham contracting arrangement, the penalties and the fallout can truly be damaging, not only for your business, but for you personally. So know the difference between an employee and a contractor and make sure you're engaging this individual in the correct way. So to recap what we've discussed today in HR for Small Business, really, when it comes to compliance, sticking your head in the sand is not the answer. You absolutely will not avoid things just because you're not looking at them. So get across it. Make sure you've covered off all of your compliance essentials to protect your business and to build an even greater team for your business. So the 5 compliance essentials I've shared today is understand your requirements around payslips and record keeping, know the national employment standards, determine which modern award applies and make sure you're compliant with it, know how to terminate someone legally if that's what you need to do, and understand the difference between employees and contractors and make sure you're following the right process for the right type of individual. I know compliance is not the most fun topic, and I get it, it can be complicated, but please ensure that you're paying attention to these compliance essentials, make sure your business is protected, and everything else becomes a whole lot easier. Thanks so much for joining me here today for today's episode. I'll be back again next week for a brand new episode. In the meantime, have a fabulous week, have a fabulous weekend, and I'll see you next week.